Welcome to the Turd Nerds. We are the functional gastroenterology podcast discussing all things poop. Before we take the plunge into today's episode, let us tell you a bit about ourselves. I'm Dr. Rebecca Sand, a naturopathic physician and acupuncturist, and I specialize in all things gastroenterology, hormones, and fertility.
I'm Dr. Ami Kapadia, and I'm a medical doctor trained in family medicine and functional medicine with a special interest in gastrointestinal health, food and environmental allergies, and autoimmune disease.
And I'm Dr. Ilana Gurvich, a naturopathic physician and acupuncturist who is board certified in naturopathic gastroenterology. I specialize in inflammatory bowel disease, IBS, and other functional digestive disorders. Let's jump into today's episode.
The following discussion is for educational purposes only and not intended to diagnose or treat any diseases or conditions. Please consult your doctor before incorporating any of this information into your care. The information presented on this podcast is not medical advice.
Welcome back to the Turd Nerds. We are here with part one of our foundation series. This time we are covering sleep and the gut. I'm so excited about it as someone who has chronic sleep issues and gut issues. There's a lot to learn.
I also can't wait till Dr. Kapadia tells us all about how we can fix this problem.
Woohoo!
Tell us, Ami.
All
tell
right.
us.
So the reason I thought we should talk about this is because, as we get older and we see patients that have seen a lot of other doctors, sometimes we assume someone has already talked to them about things like sleep.
Totally.
And we just assume that's been taken care of. And I've learned the hard way that that's not the case. And so I'm more often than not kind of circling back around to foundational issues, specifically, sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress reduction, all of those things that we learn about. So today I wanted to talk about sleep just a little bit in general, and then specifically for gut issues, and then spend a good amount of time talking about relatively simple sort of tips and tricks that you can do in your day-to-day life that could really help your sleep.
And you've been doing this, right? You've been biohacking on this?
So I don't, knock on wood, I don't have insomnia.
Oh, wow. Tell me about that.
I had a very
What's
brief
that
period
like?
at one point, and I do not want it to ever happen again. But I do empathize with people that do. It sounds horrible. Like I sometimes struggle with energy even when I've slept a full 8 hours. So I can't imagine not sleeping a full 8 hours. So yes, I've been doing some biohacking biohacking tricks with various things, including some light exposure, which we'll talk about. But so let's talk about in general. What do either of you want to throw out a number of what percentage of the country you think suffers from sleep disorders? Like, just throw out a number.
Wait, just out of question. Is this before or after COVID?
This was a survey before COVID.
Because I think it's
gotten worse. It's gotten worse.
I am going to say 35 to 40%.
Close to what I found.
I'll say 40%.
I found 30%, but I think that's probably a bit underestimated since COVID. And actually, in patients with digestive issues, it's closer to 50%.
Maybe that's why everybody in our population has sleep issues.
Yeah.
It could be.
I just assume it's the world.
So I would say, conservative estimate would be 30% of the country, in our population, closer to half, specifically when someone has digestive issues. And so the first question is, why do people with digestive issues potentially have more trouble with sleeping, right? So there's some general theories, and then we'll talk about more specifics with specifically irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease. But in general, some of the studies have shown that there's actually, anyone want to throw anything out as to why you think on a physiologic level, patients with digestive issues may have more insomnia?
I have a theory.
Okay.
Because a lot of those patients have serotonin deficiencies, and the serotonin converts to melatonin.
Yes, that's definitely a part of it.
I was going to guess melatonin.
That's great.
Melatonin.
Yes, and we'll talk about studies that have looked at giving melatonin and improvement specifically in that patient population. But the other, what's been found in studies is an elevation in pro-inflammatory cytokines, specifically in GERD, IBS, and IBD. That would be things like TNF, IL-1, IL-6, and those specific pro-inflammatory cytokines have been found in elevated levels in those patients, and those are also cytokines that affect our sleep-wake cycle. So that was one piece of the puzzle.
Do you know if that's like a genetic predisposition, or is that caused by the disease?
I believe it's caused by the disease in the studies they were looking at as far as the association, but I didn't look at genetic predisposition with that.
I mean, my guess is it would be caused by disease because like kids sleep, and I have plenty of patients who reported not having issues with sleep until their GI went off.
Yeah.
So that would be my guess.
And so, and that was in patients not only with inflammatory bowel disease, but irritable bowel syndrome as well, with which we don't always, equilibrate with having elevated inflammatory markers.
You know what? I was just talking to a gastro this week, and he said actually that's not true. Now the working theory is we do think those irritable bowel patients do have elevated inflammatory markers.
Which they do.
Okay,
but
great.
I would say like that's not the typical patient I'm checking like a HSCRP on, or
right.
these calprotectin, that type of a thing that we might be looking at. And then there's this bidirectionality with the actual GI condition and sleep, where if they have the GI condition, it's making sleep worse. If their sleep is worse, it actually can predispose to relapses in inflammatory bowel disease. They did some studies on that. So
I totally believe that.
Yeah, so it goes both ways. And so I want to talk a little bit more. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I will also say, just from my perspective, growing
Yeah.
up with a psychiatrist father,
Yes.
he always says that whenever they stop sleeping, their mania or their schizophrenia or their bipolar will go out,
Yeah.
and their GI will go out. Whenever sleep goes away, it all just goes down the toilet.
And
Yes.
all of that's being linked to inflammation right now.
Right, and it makes sense, the
Inflammation is
gut-brain axis and how everything is connected to everything. So
What? Everything is connected to everything?
everything is connected to everything. Okay, so specifically, I wanted to just touch on with irritable bowel syndrome in particular. Both of you made a good point with melatonin. They have found lower levels of melatonin and tryptophan, specifically in women with irritable bowel syndrome. There were some trials looking at giving melatonin to patients with IBS, and one of the studies found that just in 2 weeks of treatment, melatonin significantly reduced reported symptoms in patients with IBS. So that was interesting.
Okay. Are you gonna, in the future, talk about the dangers of melatonin and sleep?
We can definitely talk about that.
Okay.
Yes, there's been very mixed opinions on that. And so I think we should talk about that in the solution section when
great.
we talk about some
Because I kind of
nutrients and
know, I don't know
supplements.
where I land, so I'd love to know
I'm
where
not sure
you land.
either,
Yeah.
but yes,
there are
that would be
also studies on it being an anti-inflammatory specifically for the gut.
Right, one of the strongest.
right.
Yeah.
But so I don't know where I land.
Okay,
I
we'll
would love.
table this.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
yes, we'll have to get
Hang on,
circle back around.
everyone.
And then another study showed that with 6 months of melatonin administration, half of the population of patients with constipation predominant IBS had an improvement in constipation symptoms. So pretty interesting results with giving melatonin in patients with irritable bowel syndrome. And then Dr. Weinstock, who we all have heard his talks, has had studies showing restless leg syndrome in association with IBS and SIBO. And of course, RLS can make people get up at night, right? So that's an important thing to screen for, which I don't always remember to do.
I am going to say that I have not seen that melatonin data follow through in my practice.
Right. Melatonin sometimes has worked, sometimes has not worked. And I haven't seen necessarily that it's impacted gut function, but we're always doing multiple things. So I can't say for certain that it hasn't.
Yeah.
And then this was an interesting study with sleep and IBS. They did a study on residents, and the fewer hours they slept while they were on call, the worse their IBS was later in that, the following days or weeks, which would make sense.
Makes perfect sense.
That was interesting. And then specifically with inflammatory bowel disease, we know that patients with IBD can have nighttime symptoms with abdominal pain, urgency, diarrhea. Of course, that's going to interrupt sleep. Certain medications that have to be used in IBD at times, including steroids, can affect sleep. And then again, this bidirectionality with the inflammatory cytokines that we talked about. A couple of studies looking at sleep disturbances in IBD. Again, they just supported that there's a strong correlation when either symptomatology goes out of whack, either sleep or the IBD symptoms, it adversely affects the other end of that system. So that's mostly what I wanted to talk about. There was actually a study that showed poor sleep in patients with Crohn's disease showed a twofold increased risk of recurring active disease for those that were previously in remission.
Wow.
So
I feel like that makes sense.
Just another support to that that causation can going both ways. There was similar studies on melatonin and IBD, again, showing significant improvement in inflammation in patients with Crohn's up to 78% and ulcerative colitis up to 88%. I don't have dosing on that, but I think it was a standard melatonin dosing in that study.
Do you know if they were checking calprotectin or ESR?
I'd have to look back at the details, Rebecca. I don't know that specifically. They just showed, I believe they were checking symptoms, and I do think they were checking some sort of histological aspect as well of monitoring the disease.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we know that if you don't sleep well, your digestive symptoms can be worse. If you have digestive symptoms, your sleep can be worse. So I wanted to talk about the solutions part and what, an approach that we can take. So if we're not asking patients with gut issues about their sleep, we're kind of missing the boat on a big piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so before that, can we just start with the baseline?
Yes.
What is the foundational thing you tell all patients about sleep?
Well, first, actually, I wanted to make sure we're not forgetting to screen for common things that cause sleep disruption that, again, we might have assumed someone else would have already asked them about. So this is quite brief.
Yeah.
Sleep apnea, upper airway resistance syndrome, which is common in thin females that you may not think of sleep apnea in.
People with smaller facial structures.
Yes, which is very common these days due to multiple issues affecting facial growth, which we could get into at some point. But basically, if there's some simple resources I have on a web page that we can link to if someone is wondering if their patient population might be suffering from this. But you specifically need to ask the sleep doctor or ask the patient to ask the sleep doctor that they want to be screened for UARS and not just sleep apnea. Because otherwise, if they're a thin female, they'll say you don't have sleep apnea. Why are you coming here?
Is the screening different?
Well, they have to look for different things on the sleep study for UARS as opposed to just sleep apnea.
And to qualify, because they'll usually screen for like neck circumference and things like that they don't always meet the criteria for like obstructive sleep apnea. So some doctors are quite savvy with it, but it's good to have someone who.
Yeah, so we'll link to that. I did make a webpage because I felt like it was important enough that people need to know about it. Restless leg syndrome, which I don't typically ask specifically, but patients usually tell us if they have that. And then mouth breathing, which is, again, I have some references on my website. That might be a tip off that they might be having some issues with breathing at night as well.
And I just do want to refer everybody to that amazing book, Breathe.
Yes.
Phenomenal book. If you ever are looking for something to like blow your mind, that book kind of blew everybody's mind.
That one, and also Dr. Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, would be like a very key reference as well.
That one reads like a horror novel.
Does it?
Oh my God.
Okay, I've listened to many interviews and I've read bits and pieces.
It's pretty good, but be careful who reads
it. It's scary.
Yes, I read all of it, but I will tell you, it really reads like a horror novel. Like you're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. How have I lived this long with my poor sleep?
He has a TED Talk intro,
right?
If you want to take baby steps. But.
Okay, so basics of what we tell people if they're having trouble sleeping. We can talk about the things we each tell our patients, then we can go through the list that I have here, which would be more comprehensive and will at some point become a handout. But I always ask about caffeine. So caffeine has at least 4 to 6 hour half-life. So if you drink it at like noon, there's still a percentage of it in your body when you're trying to go to bed. So ideally you limit caffeine to the early hours. I've had patients where literally decaf tea in the morning is affecting their sleep at night. So really, patients hate us if we do this. So my husband has told me, don't take anyone off coffee unless you've actually exhausted all other options. But sometimes it's worth it if they can't sleep to do a trial completely off of caffeine, or at least limiting it to the morning hours. Dr. Walker says 12 to 14 hours before bedtime.
I learned back in school, so I don't have a source for this, that there's a genetic component
yes.
to how we metabolize caffeine.
Right.
So know your body.
Right.
If you're one of the people that can get away with it, awesome. But
right.
if you're not, you kind of do have to honor that.
It's true. Dr. Walker also says for the people who don't think it affects them, they've shown studies that if they're having an espresso at dinner and they say, I'm fine and go to sleep, it still was affecting their REM and deep sleep.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I will again cite Michael Pollan. Caffeine creates a problem that only caffeine can fix.
Yes, but it's so delicious.
It is delicious.
Especially in Portland where it's like an antidepressant in the winter. So
I don't think the word like belongs in that sentence. It is. It is an antidepressant.
Yes, it is an antidepressant. So the other thing that I talk to patients about a lot that's not completely mainstream would be electromagnetic field exposure. So again, I've got a web link to my website, but I tell everyone ideally
you need to define what that means.
Okay, so there's some controversy over this, but there is good science showing that exposure to Wi-Fi radiation, I'm not saying don't use Wi-Fi. I'm saying ideally we want to limit our exposure when our body's trying to recover and rest at night. It's fine for most people in normal quantities at night specifically. If it's possible, I tell people to get a Wi-Fi timer so their Wi-Fi turns off at night. I know we've talked about this. You can set it up like a Christmas tree timer. Ideally, nothing plugged in within 6 feet of their head. Put your phone on airplane mode at night if you're not like on call or something. Those are basics for that. The other sort of more standard lifestyle things that we tell people, we'll go through a couple of the boring ones first, then we'll get to the more exciting light exposure. But alcohol, even one drink, messes up your sleep. So people don't want to hear that.
Is like one of the biggest factors in sleep quality.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And it's hard to have that conversation with patients, because sometimes they're using it for a particular to help with their mental health. But I think it's important to. I remember one of my attendings, there was an interaction. The patient was drinking 5 to 6 drinks a week, and she didn't really think that was a lot. And he phrased it very nicely, like, that's not in a very kind way, like, that's not an insignificant amount of alcohol to be consuming, and it may be playing a role in what we're trying to do here, So it's a tricky one, but I think it's worth talking about. Late night eating can actually be associated with poor sleep. So a lot of us like to snack at night. But ideally within 2 to 3 hours of bed, we don't want to eat.
I will say that one gets me.
It's very hard when I'm doing work at night. So one of our colleagues, wonderful colleagues who's been doing mindfulness activities for many years, said, it's okay to be uncomfortable. You don't have to eat or something. If you have to do work, you can just be uncomfortable and do it. So that's easier said than done. But yes, try not to eat late at night. You want to have a cool, dark room. So ideally 65 degrees. Some of my patients really like the chili pad if they're having night sweats or hot sweats as part of menopause. It's been helpful.
Is it? What's a chili
pad?
It's
this pad that you sleep on that cools you down.
It's like the opposite of a table warmer.
And it's a whole body?
I think so.
It fits on your mattress.
Because I think that Dr. Walker in his book, he talks about like putting a cold thing over your head.
Oh, interesting. This is a whole thing you sleep on, I believe. It's called a chili pad.
Yeah, I've had a lot of patients menopausal who like bamboo sheets.
Oh,
okay. Yeah.
As well.
And then 2 more quick ones. Exercise, ideally at any time of the day except, right before bed, and then some sort of calming activity anytime you can to calm your nervous system, and specifically removing things before bed that are going to stress your nervous system, like looking at screens. So ideally, again, 1 to 2 hours before bed, no screens, like no iPad. There was a study that showed with the iPad compared to reading a book, 50% suppression of melatonin. If you're going to do it, wear blue blockers, but ideally just like read a book or listen to a podcast. Don't look at a screen within those last 2 hours. Don't send the last email for work. It's going to stress your nervous system.
Can we talk about exercise just real quick?
Yeah.
I sat through this training for a year. I spent a lot of money. I learned almost nothing. But one of the things that I learned was this concept of alpha and beta stim. Have I talked to you guys about this?
No.
It's interesting. So the class that I sat through was endobiogeny, taught by this absolutely genius man. He was too much of a genius. I didn't get it.
Okay.
And he talked about the fact that the sympathetic nervous system is broken down into alpha and beta. And then, so alpha is like build. Beta is like the expression, and that resets us back to parasympathetic, right? So sympathetic isn't just sympathetic or parasympathetic. It's like sympathetic's broken down in these 2 parts. And one of the things he talked about is if your body, like if you going through exercise, which is like the build, and the expression, if that gives you energy, like that energizes me, you should be exercising in the morning.
Okay.
But if doing exercise, if what happens is throughout exercise, you're just always in that beta expression, and then you get wiped out to the para, then you should be doing your exercise in the evening. And it's kind of like exactly what we said with alcohol, with caffeine. You have to know your body and listen to if it gives you energy or not.
That makes sense. That's really good. So I wanted to give 2 tips for calming at night. Again, I'll link to, I have a mental health and stress page. I have to refer back to everything. So there's multiple apps. We'll have a link for that. But specifically, a couple of my colleagues told me about something called Whole Tones, which is like a small device you can buy that plays tones that can help people fall asleep. And then there's some audio recordings by a gentleman named Michael Sealey, Sealey, that's hypnotherapy, that also helped one of my patients quite a bit for nighttime calming down for sleep. And then let's see here. So we talked about all of the basics, and then I wanted to talk about light. So this is the part that I find very exciting, and I have noticed quite a difference just implementing these things in myself. So Dr. Andrew Huberman has a great podcast on optimizing sleep. I think it was one of his first couple episodes. And basically, some of the keys are when we're exposed to light, it hits our retina and it has an effect on our biologic clock in our brain and has a really large impact on our circadian rhythms and sleep-wake cycle. So ideally, we're going outdoors in the early part of the day, ideally within an hour of getting up, to get outdoor light exposure. so that it can tell our biologic clock that we want to be alert for the next several hours, and it'll help the melatonin cycles and the sleep-wake cycles. So his specific recommendations are for if it's overcast like in Portland, you need more time. If it's sunny like it is sometimes here and more so in other places, you need less time. So, I would say 5 to 10 minutes if it's sunny would be a minimal. If it's overcast, 30 to 60 minutes, but at least 20 to 30 minutes is a great sort of aim to shoot for. Anything is better than nothing. So if you just want to drink your coffee outside, walk the dog, whatever, I think even 10 to 15 minutes on an overcast day is certainly better than nothing. And so, yeah.
What do you think about it, like people who are really busy in the morning, kind of combining going outside with full spectrum light inside?
I didn't find data on that. He really emphasizes getting outdoor light, but I know he said I've read in places where that's just not an option. Right. Getting some sort of indoor light can be definitely better than nothing. Right. And they say to kind of when you first get up, if it's not light out, just turn on all the lights, like make it as bright as you can. And then when it does get bright out, if you can get out for even a little while, that's great. So that's like a biohack that I feel like a lot of people don't do. I wasn't doing, and I found it to be, and he said, and they say like in some of the studies, they talked about how you will feel a difference like in your mood, and it's not like a placebo effect. It's like a real effect.
Do you feel like you notice a difference?
I feel like I have. Yeah, I feel like I've
noticed a difference. You do this like while you're brushing your teeth? When do you do it?
No, I tried to switch my walk from the afternoon to the morning. So I'll try to like drink the coffee either on the porch and then walk, or just try to get out for the walk, and I know not everyone has that luxury before work. So any time in the earlier part of day is definitely better than nothing. Let me see what else. And then at night, of course, the opposite. You want to use, like, if possible, dimmer lights and not overhead lights. You want to have like desk lamps or side lamps or those little red reading lights. You don't want to have bright overhead lights right before bed. Questions about any of that?
No, I love that. I also just feel like I do my bike commute, but I don't know. Is it too late?
Counts. No, that counts. No, I mean, I believe that the experts in general say just try to get it in the early part of the day.
Okay.
There's something about the first hour of light that I think
the first hour that you're awake, or the first hour that the light is up?
I think it's the first hour. That's a really good question. I think it's 2 hours. It's something like 2 hours before bed and 1 hour after you wake up is some sort of critical period. But I definitely think a bike ride at like 7:30 a.m. is really good. I think
I will say when we did our cross country bicycle trip, and we were like waking up before the sun because it'd be like 100 degrees by 1 p.m. There was a feeling that I can't explain inside your body where you are waking up with the birds.
Yeah.
It is like probably the most sedating my nervous system has ever felt.
Right. And I always equilibrate this to just being in Hawaii, but whenever I visit my mother-in-law, I wake up with the birds. She lives in Honolulu. And then I sit on the deck to watch the sunrise and drink my coffee. And so I just thought it was because we were on vacation, but now I'm like, maybe it's because I was getting light exposure early in the morning.
It probably was Hawaii too.
Well, it's never stressful. I mean, it's never that relaxing because my husband is always doing projects. But.
I have 2 questions about the light thing.
Yeah.
One, for a lot of our patients, especially, really busy people with kids, like that time with TV or on your phone is like the only grace period you get throughout the day.
Right.
So I've been telling people, like, use your screens that have the filters.
Yes,
max
definitely.
them out, and use blue light blocking glasses too. Just everything you possibly can. Try to have as much buffer as you can before bed.
Right.
Because realistically,
I know we have to be realistic. Yeah. So this is like, and Dr. Walker talks about that in interviews. We want to give people the facts, but you still want to enjoy your life. So whatever you can do to mitigate. And so I use Swanwick blue blockers. I'm not affiliated with them, but it's a good brand, and I feel like they work well. So I'm equally guilty of looking at my phone in the night.
Totally. Yeah. And so the other thing is having the time, especially with light in your room, in your bedroom. And that's something I think Matthew Walker talked quite a bit about. And it's one of those things, they recommend for sleep, like don't have a clock where you can see the time because then you stress about it. It took me maybe 10 years to really get on board with that, but that's probably been the biggest impact for me on getting better sleep is removing that.
Removing the alarm clock?
A clock that tells the time in the middle of the night. And I don't know if it's the light.
Yeah.
Or if it's just the stress about like washing up again. But a number of my patients have said that once you can do it, it's a hard thing to kick.
Yeah.
that has helped.
And you definitely don't want any lights in the room, like electronic light. I just tell people to use electric tape and cover the lights. Like if there's a little light on, then your remote won't work. So you have to remember that's why the remote's not working. But then you remove it to get the remote to work. So that's a good tip for just, you don't want any light in your bedroom, ideally. Okay. So next I was going to talk a bit about supplements. I know often we want to do something to help, right? And so I found that nothing works amazing if we don't do those other things, but there are things that can help. And so we'll have your all input as well. But the main ones I've tried with people are melatonin, 5-HTP or tryptophan, GABA, Zen Sleep, CBD occasionally, cortisol manager, and sometimes Cerephos.
Cerephos has gone out of business, so let's take that one off the list.
Okay.
Bummer. Yeah, this was a good one.
Do you have favorites that you like to use in certain instances?
Okay, I'm going to say that in my experience with my own insomnia and with 1,000 patients, I feel like sleep supplements is basically the equivalent of throwing spaghetti against the wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have no idea how much it's going to stick, and you are always trying to figure out if this is really expensive spaghetti or not.
Right.
There is an element to that. I have gotten quite a bit of traction in certain populations. So pregnancy, L-theanine.
Okay.
And then menopause is really the only time I see cortisol manager work.
Oh, I don't agree. I think that I see cortisol manager working across the spectrum, not only for menopausal women.
Yeah.
Sometimes, not always.
Yeah, and that has L-theanine, right?
It's mainly magnolia and phosphatidylserine.
Okay, I think it might have a little bit in it, but maybe not. And then Nardova. Honestly, some Chinese herb blends.
So I feel like nobody's going to know about Nardova because it's this little company,
right.
But it is one of my favorites.
It is one of my favorites too, and it's pretty cheap. So it's a blend of Chinese herbs and L-theanine. It's relatively inexpensive. I think it's pretty good sourcing.
Yeah, and it's made locally.
Great.
The way that I describe Nardova, so the core formula is something called Swanzhao Rentang, which is a Chinese herbal formula, and it works on pericardial vexation, right? So the person who this works really well on is they're like getting more tired, and then something happens, a noise, a wind, something, and they like whoosh themselves out, and now they're wide awake again.
Right.
Nardova lets the wei qi settle in. And lets your body regenerate.
Yep, totally. That's what I see too. So I guess when I'm trying to prescribe for people, I ask, are you having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep? And that would be more, the L-theanines in general would be more staying asleep. Falling asleep, maybe the CBD, melatonin, of course. Any other ideas on?
Yeah, I mean, I want to remind everybody about the nervines, you know, like oats, hops, skullcap, kava, valerian, but some people get worse with that. California poppy, like all of those. And then, vitamin B6.
Oh.
There's some information about vitamin B6, 5-hydroxytryptophan.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, great. We're not going to talk about meds today. I mean, we can at some point, but I want to talk about a couple hidden causes of insomnia that I see not infrequently. And this will be pretty brief, but so I've had numerous patients that are on T3 that it's made them worse and it's caused insomnia. And they've been on it for years and it's just been sort of left on.
T4 also, or just
T4 also, but I would say T3 more so. That's been added at some point for questionable or non-questionable reasons. And so we've done trials off of that, and that's been like the missing issue in some people.
I've seen that hit at menopause.
Okay.
They've been fine with T3 until menopause, and I don't know why that shifts.
There's
probably some physiologic reason.
Okay, so that's just something to look out for. Tick-borne infections, which, you know, you can say you don't treat it, but you're going to treat it. So at some point, we're going to talk more about that because it affects the GI tract and sleep quite a bit. Exposure to water damaged buildings and mold, huge cause of insomnia and the people where nothing else has worked. Heavy metals, I've had patients where that was the only thing that it was. And once we detox, that they could finally sleep after like 40 years. And then histamine spikes is one that we see not infrequently, where I've had numerous patients tell me they have more sleep issues when they're eating higher histamine foods. And so we have to work on that whole cascade. And that's, I think,
I would like to add, there are some women who get insomnia during their PMS, like right when that progesterone is kicking in. I see that a lot.
And I see it in low ferritin.
Oh, yeah.
And get resolved with specifically iron infusions.
That makes sense because that might also give them restless leg syndrome. Okay.
Totally.
Okay, great.
That was a big.
Awesome.
Do you have anything to add?
I kind of want to talk about meds at some
I know
point
we're running out of time for this
We'll
episode. Should we do a part two and talk about some meds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let me just do a quick recap. Okay, so here's what we learned. About 30% of the population doesn't sleep. If you're looking at patients with IBS or IBD, we're at 50% of the population doesn't sleep. There's a ton of reasons why: restless leg, bloating, pain. And also, when you don't sleep, all of those things get worse. When we're talking about treatments or prevention, we're talking about light therapy in the morning, dim therapy at night, making sure you're exercising, making sure you're not drinking caffeine, making sure you're not drinking alcohol. There, for interventions, melatonin's a thing. We have not, I guess we're going to keep the pro or con for a different day. And then herbs are helpful. And then look for underlying causes like mold, like tick-borne illnesses and stuff like that.
And screen for sleep apnea.
Yeah. Ooh, great talk on me. Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right.
Love it.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Stay tuned. We release episodes every 2 weeks.
If you like this episode, please subscribe and don't forget to rate and review us to help spread the Turd Nerd word.